The federal courthouse of Chicago stood like a monument of marble and memory. Its cold walls had seen decades of verdicts, victories, and tears. But today it would witness something else, the birth of quiet defiance. The oak doors creaked open, and Maya Richardson stepped into the courtroom. Her black suit was neatly pressed, though the fabric carried the wrinkles of sleepless nights. A stack of case files trembled slightly in her hands, more from nerves than from weight. The gallery murmured in hushed tones, curious, doubtful, some even amused. The clerk announced her case in a flat tone. Case 24C-1187, the State of Illinois versus Henry Dalton. Appeal hearing, Attorney Maya Richardson appearing for the defense. Maya walked toward the podium, heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. The echo filled the hall like a heartbeat. And there he was, Judge Howard Kavanaugh, seated high above in his black robe. His hair had gone gray, but his smirk hadn't aged a day. He had once been her mentor at the university, the brilliant constitutional scholar who had lectured about integrity and equality under the law. He had been the reason she chose law in the first place. Now, he was the very face of everything she had learned to question. Kavanaugh looked down at her as if she were a student again, standing before him in class. "Miss Richardson," he began, dragging her name out slowly. "It's been a while. I see you've chosen an interesting path." Maya steadied her voice. "Yes, Your Honor. I filed an appeal on behalf of my client, Henry Dalton, whose conviction—" Kavanaugh leaned back, interrupting her. "Conviction for armed robbery, wasn't it? The evidence was overwhelming. I remember the case well. What could you possibly have found that a federal jury missed?" His words carried the sharpness of mockery disguised as curiosity. Maya swallowed her nerves. "Your Honor, I've discovered discrepancies in the eyewitness testimony. 2 witnesses were coerced by law enforcement officers. The appeal outlines," he chuckled. Actually chuckled. The sound echoed, rippling through the courtroom like a drop in still water. "Miss Richardson," he said, his smile condescending, "you've always been idealistic. That's charming in the classroom, not in a courtroom. You're asking this court to believe that the entire justice system failed your client? On what grounds? A moral conviction?" A few people in the back laughed quietly. Even the bailiff smiled. Maya's heart raced, but she stood firm. "On constitutional grounds, Your Honor. The evidence was obtained unlawfully, and the confession—" Kavanaugh raised a hand sharply. "That's enough. I've read your brief. It's amateurish at best, full of emotional arguments and very little law." He flipped through her documents, exaggerating the motion for effect. Pages fluttered and hit the bench like paper bullets. "You should have known better than to waste this court's time. But then again," he leaned forward, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper, "you always had a flair for dramatics, didn't you?" A slow wave of laughter filled the courtroom. Maya clenched her hands at her sides, forcing herself not to flinch. She wanted to scream, to remind him that justice was not theater, that people's lives were not punchlines, but she held her ground. "Your Honor," she said softly but firmly, "if believing in justice makes me dramatic, then I'll take that as a compliment." The laughter stopped for a moment. A few heads turned. Even the stenographer looked up. Judge Kavanaugh's smile faded just slightly. His pride bristled. He struck his gavel once. Crack! "This appeal is denied." Case dismissed, the words were final. A death sentence for the man she represented, and a public execution of her dignity. The gavel echoed through her bones. She stood still, staring at the mahogany bench that had once symbolized truth, now tainted by arrogance. Kavanaugh gathered his notes, muttering, "You'll learn, Miss Richardson. Law isn't passion. It's power, and you don't have it." Maya turned away slowly, clutching her files. Her vision blurred, but not from tears and from fury. She walked down the long aisle, past the smirking attorneys, the whispering clerks, the judge who once believed she was promising. Each step out of that courtroom felt heavier than the last. Outside, the afternoon sunlight hit her face, but it didn't warm her. She stood at the top of the courthouse stairs, breathing hard, the city buzzing below her. Indifferent, alive, uncaring. For a long moment, she didn't move. She just stared at the courthouse doors behind her, her reflection faint in the glass. Then she whispered so quietly that even the wind barely caught it, You'll remember this day, Howard. One day you'll remember. The world went on, cars honking, people laughing, a city swallowing dreams whole. But something inside Maya Richardson had changed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defeat. It was something deeper, a calm, defiant fire beginning to burn behind her eyes. She looked up at the sky, endless blue, unjudging, and took a single step forward. The journey had begun. The night rain fell in sheets over Chicago, blurring the neon lights and washing the city in tired silver. Inside a tiny apartment on the city's south side, Maya Richardson sat on the edge of her bed, her case files scattered like broken promises around her. The room was small. One desk, one lamp, one stubborn dream refusing to die. Her hands still trembled from the memory of that afternoon. The echo of Judge Kavanaugh's laughter wouldn't stop replaying in her head. The humiliation had settled somewhere deep, not on her skin, but in her soul. She pressed her palms to her face, whispering to herself, "Why did I even think I could win?" For a moment, she allowed the pain to be real. The air felt heavy with disappointment, the kind that silences even your own thoughts. The digital clock on her nightstand blinked 11:47 p.m. Bills lay unopened on her table. Her rent was due. Her refrigerator hummed with emptiness. And yet, in the corner of the room near the window, her law book still sat upright, spines worn and pages marked with yellow notes. They looked back at her like silent witnesses, reminding her that this wasn't how her story was supposed to end. She got up slowly, moving toward the desk where her framed law school diploma gathered dust. Her reflection stared back from the glass, weary eyes, trembling lips. A woman who had given everything to be taken seriously, only to be mocked. She wanted to smash it, to throw it against the wall, but instead she set it back down, gently. Maya reached for the file labeled Dalton Appeal, denied. The word denied felt like a knife, but beneath it, in her own handwriting, she had written a single line months ago. Never fight for applause. Fight for what's right. Her throat tightened. She traced the words with her fingers. Even when life had laughed at her, she had once believed those words. Maybe she still did. Outside, thunder rolled like distant drums. The sound of it felt almost encouraging, like the world reminding her it. Two had storms but never stopped moving. She sat down, opened the case file again, and reread every page, every signature, every technical flaw she could find. Her mind burned through fatigue. If Kavanaugh saw flaws, she would see opportunity. If he saw weakness, she would build strength from it. "You don't get to define me," she murmured to the empty room. Hours passed. The lamp flickered. The rain softened. And as dawn approached, Maya was still awake, surrounded by a fortress of books and scribbled notes. Somewhere between exhaustion and enlightenment, she realized something profound. The laughter she heard in that courtroom wasn't hers to carry. It was his to regret. The next morning, she took one small action that would define the rest of her life. She walked to the corkboard above her desk, the one cluttered with to-do lists and unpaid bills, and pinned something new in the center. A single sheet of paper. It was the official rejection notice from the Federal Court of Appeals. Stamped in bold red letters, "Case dismissed." Underneath it, she wrote in thick black marker, "Remember why you started." Then, beside it, she pinned a photograph, her and her mother from years ago, smiling outside the law school on graduation day. Her mother's words echoed faintly in her memory. "You don't fight the world by yelling louder, baby. You fight it by standing longer." Maya took a deep breath. The air still smelled of coffee and rain. Something inside her clicked. A small, silent revolution. She didn't know how or when, but she knew this wasn't over. She'd rebuild her name, case by case, word by word, brick by brick. Not to prove Kavanaugh wrong, but to prove that justice, even when laughed at, still had a voice. She turned off the lamp, light breaking through the blinds as the city woke up. The world outside didn't know it yet, but a storm was forming. Not of rain this time, but of resolve, and its name was Maya Richardson. Morning sunlight spilled through the grimy windows of the South Side Community Legal Center, illuminating the chaos of half-broken furniture and stacks of paperwork that reached for the ceiling. The air smelled of instant coffee and old carpet, and in the middle of it all sat Maya Richardson, scribbling furiously in the margins of a legal brief. The phone rang, papers fluttered. A volunteer called out from another room, "Maya, the eviction hearing's at 10. She looked up, eyes weary but alive. "Tell Mrs. Jenkins I'm on my way," she said, grabbing her briefcase, the same one she'd carried into Kavanaugh's courtroom years ago. Only this time, she didn't walk into marble halls and mahogany benches. She walked into human stories. The neighborhood courtroom was cramped, the benches uneven, the audience restless. Her client, Mrs. Jenkins, was a grandmother in her 70s, 2 months behind on rent after her pension got cut. Her landlord's attorney, a man in a $1,000 suit, smirked as Maya took her place. He whispered, "You sure you're in the right courtroom, sweetheart?" Maya smiled, calm and composed. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Her voice carried, not loud but firm enough to make the judge pause mid-note. When she began to speak, the courtroom changed. Gone was the nervous student. Gone was the tremor in her voice. Her words were sharp, clear, deliberate, like a blade honed through pain. She argued not from pride, but from purpose. Within 20 minutes, the eviction was overturned. Mrs. Jenkins burst into tears, hugging her tightly. "You saved me, baby. You really saved me." Maya smiled, trying not to cry. "No, ma'am. You just needed someone to remind the system that you matter." That day, a rumor began spreading through the South Side. "There's a lawyer who fights for us, and she doesn't charge a dime." Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Maya handled every kind of case the city threw at her. Wrongful evictions, wage theft, immigration detentions, school expulsions. She worked 12-hour days and ate dinner from vending machines. She lived off gratitude, not income. Her shoes wore out, her phone cracked, but her heart stayed steady. And somewhere between exhaustion and purpose, she found her calling. The newspapers didn't notice. The Bar Association didn't care, but people did. They came to her office in waves, single mothers, factory workers, ex-convicts trying to rebuild their lives, and she listened to every story, every single one. One evening, after winning a police misconduct case that saved a young man from wrongful imprisonment, Maya walked home under flickering streetlights. Her reflection passed by shop windows, tired eyes, worn-out coat, but a quiet glow behind them. At the corner of 79th and Cottage Grove, a little girl ran up to her, holding her mother's hand. "Miss Maya." "My mom says you're like a superhero." Maya laughed softly, kneeling to the child's height. "Superheroes wear capes." "I just wear paperwork," the girl giggled. "You help people." "That's better." Maya's smile lingered long after they walked away. That night she sat at her desk opening a worn leather journal, a habit she'd started after losing her first case. She wrote, "The law is broken not by crime but by indifference. If I can fix even a corner of it, I'll keep going." She underlined the words twice. Over the next 2 years, the people's lawyer became a local legend. Community centers began inviting her to speak. Churches prayed for her cases during Sunday services. Young law students started shadowing her, calling her Professor Maya. She refused every job offer from corporate firms. When asked why, she said, "Because justice shouldn't come with an invoice." Her tiny office walls began to fill with letters, handwritten notes from families she'd helped. One read, "You fought for me when no one else would." Another, "You made me believe in the system again." She framed them all. Not out of pride, but to remind herself. She was building something real. Then, one evening, she received a call from a national journalist. "Ms. Richardson, we're doing a feature on community lawyers making an impact. Could we interview you?" She almost laughed. "There are so many others." "No," the journalist interrupted. "Not like you." The next week, the headline appeared in the Chicago Tribune. "The People's Lawyer, Maya Richardson's War for Justice." Photos of her walking out of neighborhood courthouses with clients, her laughter with children, her desk piled with open books. It all went viral, TV stations called. Universities invited her to lecture. Awards began arriving, plaques, medallions, certificates, but none of that mattered to her because, for Maya, the real award came every time she heard a courtroom go silent, and justice whispered back. Finally, one rainy night, as she locked up the legal center, she stood outside looking at the flickering sign, Southside Community Legal Aid. The letters buzzed faintly, half the bulbs dead, but she smiled anyway. It's not much, she whispered to herself, but it's home. She walked away into the night, briefcase in hand, head held high, unaware that her name would soon echo far beyond the South Side. The seeds of destiny had been planted, and they were already beginning to bloom. The city of Chicago glowed with 1,000 restless lights, but in a small corner of the South Side, one light burned longer than the rest, a desk lamp that belonged to Maya Richardson. It was 2:17 a.m. The streets outside were silent, except for the soft hum of buses in the distance. Maya sat surrounded by towers of paper, legal drafts, handwritten notes, highlighted reports, her pen racing against exhaustion. On her wall hung the same corkboard she'd pinned her first rejection notice on. Now it was covered with dozens of them. Case denied. Appeal rejected. Insufficient grounds. But in the middle of all that failure glowed something new, a single letter stamped with gold ink. Congratulations, Ms. Richardson. You are the recipient of the National Civil Liberty Award. She stared at it often, not out of vanity, but disbelief. She never worked for recognition, yet it kept finding her. Every rejection had turned into a stepping stone, every failure a forge. By day, she argued in community courts. By night, she wrote. Her first book, The Broken Scale of Justice, began as a collection of essays typed in the dim light of her apartment. It spoke of bias in sentencing, systemic neglect, and the quiet humanity lost in bureaucracy. When it was published, critics dismissed it as idealistic. But within months, law professors across the country began quoting her chapters. Students called it a voice for the unheard. Her second book followed, The Measure of Mercy. This time, the media paid attention. She was invited to panels, symposiums, debates. The same institutions that once ignored her were now begging for her insight. In one scene that would later appear in a documentary about her life, Maya was shown walking through a dimly lit community center, children tugging at her sleeves. A small boy asked, "Are you famous?" She laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, sweetheart. Just loud enough to be heard now." That night, she sat in her car outside the center, watching the kids wave goodbye in the rearview mirror. She smiled, whispering, "That's all I ever wanted, to be heard." Her days became a blur of hearings, speeches, interviews, and late-night writing. She taught legal aid workshops at universities that once rejected her applications. She met with senators about reform bills. She spoke before panels of the American Bar Association. Her words now met with applause instead of laughter. Still, she never forgot where she came from. Every Friday, she returned to the South Side office. Same broken sign, same chipped desk, to meet clients who couldn't afford anyone else. When asked why she still did it, she'd smile and say, "Because the law doesn't start in marble halls. It starts where people are hurting." One winter evening, she was invited to speak at a gala honoring women in law. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, laughter, and polished arrogance. Maya stood at the podium, wearing a simple black gown. No jewelry, no entourage, just truth. "They said compassion doesn't belong in the courtroom," she began. "That justice is blind. But maybe justice was never meant to be blind. Maybe it was meant to see what power ignores." The crowd went silent. Then applause erupted, the kind that feels like release. A reporter wrote the next day, "Maya Richardson doesn't just practice law, she redefines it." But success came with weight. The higher she rose, the lonelier it became. Old friends drifted away. Colleagues envied her fame. Her days blurred into a cycle of travel, paperwork, and causes too big for one person to carry. Some nights exhaustion whispered, "You've done enough." But every time she thought of quitting, she remembered the courtroom laughter. And she remembered her vow. "You'll remember this day, Howard." That vow wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. To prove that belief, not privilege, defined greatness. Years passed. Maya's influence spread beyond Chicago. She testified before Congress about sentencing reform. She led initiatives to make legal aid accessible nationwide. Her writings became part of law curriculums. Her speeches were studied in universities around the world. And through it all, she carried humility like armor. Once, during a radio interview, a host asked, "What made you so relentless, Maya?" She smiled softly, her voice calm and steady. "Because I've seen what happens when good people stay silent. I decided I'd rather be tired than silent." The host paused. "And what about Judge Kavanaugh? Ever hear from him again?" A brief silence. "No," she said. "But someday he'll hear from me, in the right way." That right way came sooner than anyone expected. Her third book, The Constitution of Conscience, became a national bestseller. It was a blend of legal philosophy and memoir, her journey from courtroom humiliation to public trust. It reached the White House reading list. Senators quoted her. Presidents mentioned her in speeches. And one morning, her assistant burst into her office, breathless. "Maya, you just got invited to the White House Judicial Reform Summit." Maya blinked, smiling in disbelief. "The White House, me?" "Yes, you're not just invited, you're the keynote speaker." That night, as she prepared her notes, she stared at the corkboard again. The same rejection pinned at its center. Faded with time, her eyes softened. She reached out, touched the paper gently, and whispered, "You see this, Howard? This is what laughter builds when you use it as fuel." Outside, the city buzzed. Inside, Maya Richardson, once humiliated, once dismissed, was quietly becoming a name history would never forget. The marble hallways of the National Judicial Conference echoed with footsteps, cameras, and murmured conversations. It was a crisp autumn morning in Washington, D.C., the kind where the air itself felt electric. The conference theme was printed in gold across the banners, "Restoring Faith in the American Justice System," and beneath it, two names were highlighted as keynote debaters: Honor Judge Robert Kavanaugh and attorney Maya Richardson. When Maya saw the program, her heart tightened, not in fear but in closure. The same man who had once laughed at her appeal, dismissed her passion, and reduced her to a spectacle, was now about to share a stage with her, as an equal. She stood backstage, reviewing her notes. Her hair was tied neatly, her black suit sharp but simple. No jewelry, no pretense, only presence. Across the room, Judge Kavanaugh adjusted his cufflinks, speaking to a cluster of journalists. His voice carried that same air of superiority. Confident, controlled, entitled. He noticed her, gave a faint smirk, and said loud enough for the cameras to catch, "Well, if it isn't Ms. Richardson, I must say, you've come a long way since that. Dramatic appeal of yours." Maya met his gaze, calm, steady. "I suppose we both have, Your Honor. Though some lessons take longer to learn," a few reporters chuckled. One camera lingered on her poised expression, the look of a woman who no longer needed approval. The auditorium filled with judges, scholars, and government officials. Rows of cameras lined the back, broadcasting the event nationwide. The moderator introduced the debate. Today's dialogue explores the soul of American justice, its failures, its reforms, and its future. We are honored to have Judge Robert Kavanaugh, a long-standing voice of traditional jurisprudence, and attorney Maya Richardson, a rising advocate of reform and restorative law. Applause followed. Kavanaugh spoke first. He launched into a speech thick with pride and policy. "The justice system must remain unswayed by emotion or activism," he said. "Order depends on the firmness of law, not the fragility of empathy. Reformers often forget. Chaos hides beneath compassion." Murmurs of approval filled the room. He ended with a cold smile. "Idealism sounds beautiful, until you're the one enforcing the law." Then came Maya's turn. She stood up slowly, walked to the podium, and took a moment before speaking. Her silence demanded attention. "With all due respect, Judge Kavanaugh," she began, her voice calm but cutting, "I once believed that too, that the law must be cold to be fair. Until I realized that coldness doesn't equal justice. It only preserves power." A few heads turned. The audience leaned in. "You say compassion creates chaos," she continued. "But tell me, what's more chaotic than a system where mercy is a privilege instead of a principle?" The room stirred. Even the moderator blinked, surprised. Kavanaugh adjusted his microphone. "You're passionate, Ms. Richardson, I'll give you that. But passion doesn't rewrite the Constitution." She smiled faintly. "No," she said. "But the Constitution was written by people who believed progress was possible. They amended it when they were wrong. They redefined it when justice demanded. That's not passion, that's evolution. A wave of applause broke through the hall. Kavanaugh's jaw tensed. Maya continued, her words gaining rhythm. Slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Justice isn't blind, Your Honor. It's been trained to look away. Away from the poor. Away from the powerless. Away from those who can't afford to be seen. And if being called an activist means wanting to open those eyes, then yes, I am one. Applause roared again, louder this time. The moderator struggled to quiet the crowd. Kavanaugh shifted uncomfortably, reaching for his water. Maya turned toward him, her voice soft but piercing. You once told me, Judge, that I lacked the discipline to understand the law. But I've spent every day since then proving that the law can understand us. Gasps filled the hall. The air felt electric. Kavanaugh froze. For a brief moment, their eyes met, his filled with disbelief, hers with calm finality. The clip went viral within hours. Headlines across the country read, Maya Richardson dismantles judicial dogma in live debate. Judge Kavanaugh faces fierce truth from former student. The voice of a new legal era. Social media erupted. Law students quoted her speech. Activists replayed her words. And for the first time, the establishment trembled, not because of anger, but because of awakening. That evening, Maya sat alone in her hotel room, scrolling through the messages, hundreds of emails, thousands of mentions, congratulations from senators, professors, even strangers, but her eyes stopped at one message. It was from a small, unknown email address. The subject line read, I was there when they laughed at you. She hesitated, then opened it. Ms. Richardson, you don't know me, but I was a clerk in that courtroom years ago. I remember the day Judge Kavanaugh mocked you. I remember how small they tried to make you. Today, I watched you make the law big again. Thank you for reminding us what justice sounds like. Maya smiled. A quiet tear rolled down her cheek. The next morning, she received a call from the office of the president. They wanted to meet, to discuss national judicial reform and future leadership opportunities. She didn't know it yet, but that conversation would set the stage for what the world would soon call the Maya moment, the day the system that once silenced her would rise to its feet and applaud. The morning began like any other in Washington, D.C., the air sharp, the sky layered in soft blue-gray. But for Maya Richardson, it was the kind of morning that rewrote destiny. Her phone buzzed before dawn. A message from an unknown number simply read, The President requests your presence at the White House, 10 a.m., West Wing. Maya froze. Her heart hammered once hard. She reread the message again, then again, just to be sure she wasn't dreaming. For a long minute, she just stood there in her quiet hotel room, staring out at the city where she had once been dismissed, doubted and laughed at. Now she was being called by 9:45 a.m. She stood at the gates of the White House. Secret Service agents checked her credentials. A press crowd buzzed near the lawn, whispers of speculation rising like static. Maya Richardson's here. Do you think she's being offered a judicial position? Some say it's Supreme Court material. She heard their words but kept walking. Her black heels clicked against the pavement, each step echoing the rhythm of every sleepless night that had brought her here. Inside, a young aide led her through the West Wing corridors, walls lined with portraits of presidents and judges, each one a chapter in American law. Maya's fingers brushed lightly against the frame of Justice Thurgood Marshall's portrait. He too had faced laughter before legacy. The aide stopped in front of the Roosevelt Room. Madam Richardson, he said, voice hushed with respect, the President will see you now. Inside, the President of the United States, Elaine Harper, the nation's first black woman president, rose from her chair and extended her hand. Her presence was magnetic, her smile calm yet knowing. Maya Richardson, President Harper said, I've been following your work for years. You've done more for judicial reform than most committees combined. Maya bowed her head slightly. Thank you, Madam President. That means a great deal coming from you. Harper gestured for her to sit. Tell me something, Maya, she began. Do you remember where you were the day Judge Kavanaugh dismissed your appeal? The question caught Maya off guard. Yes, ma'am, she said softly. I remember every detail. Harper nodded, her expression sharpening. Good. Because that's where your story began, not where it ended. The laughter wasn't your failure. It was your fire. She slid a manila folder across the table. Maya hesitated before opening it, her eyes widening as she read the first page. Nomination proposal. The Honorable Maya Richardson, Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. The air left her lungs. For a second, she couldn't speak. Madam President. Harper smiled. You earned this. You rebuilt trust in a system that forgot how to listen. You spoke for those who couldn't afford to. You redefined what justice looks like in our century. Maya swallowed hard, emotion rising in her chest. I'm not sure the system's ready for me, she whispered. Harper's reply was gentle but unyielding. Then it's about time we make it ready. By noon, the world knew. Every major network interrupted their programming with the same breaking headline. President nominates Maya Richardson to U.S. Supreme Court. News anchors repeated her name with awe. Analysts debated her age, her experience, her groundbreaking approach to law. But ordinary people, teachers, students, community workers, they didn't talk about her resume. They talked about her journey. That's the same woman who used to help tenants fight eviction for free. She defended my cousin's case pro bono. She spoke truth to power. Now she is the power. Across social media, her courtroom debate clip resurfaced, captioned, From Laughter to Legacy. That night, Maya sat alone in her apartment, not the small one from years ago, but a modest one near Capitol Hill. Outside, camera flashes dotted the skyline. Reporters waited for her statement, but she didn't rush. She sat by the window, watching the lights shimmer over the Potomac. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again? This time a short message. Congratulations, Justice Richardson. RC, she knew who it was. Judge Robert Kavanaugh. For a moment, she didn't know how to feel. Anger, forgiveness, or something in between. Then she typed back, Thank you, Judge. You were part of my lesson. I hope I was part of yours. She hit send, and with it let go of the last shadow of her past. 2 weeks later, the confirmation hearings began. Cameras filled the Senate chamber as Maya took her seat. Senators questioned her rulings, her philosophy, her courage to reform. One asked sharply, Do you believe empathy belongs in the courtroom? Maya looked up calmly. Empathy doesn't replace justice, she said. It refines it. The law without humanity is just punishment wearing a robe. The room fell silent. Another senator, skeptical, leaned forward. And what will you do when the system resists you? Her reply was instant. The same thing I did when it laughed at me. Keep working until it listens. The day of the final Senate vote, millions watched live. The result flashed across the screen. Confirmed, 78-22. Cheers erupted outside the Capitol. People waved handmade signs reading, Justice Richardson for the people. Inside, Maya closed her eyes as tears gathered quietly. She thought of her mother. Of every night she wanted to quit. Of every laugh that once felt like a verdict. Now, it was just an echo, fading into applause. A few weeks later, under the towering dome of the Supreme Court, Maya stood with her hand on a Bible. President Harper stood beside her. The Chief Justice raised his voice. Do you, Maya Elizabeth Richardson, solemnly swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States? Her voice was steady, strong, and certain. I do. In the crowd sat Judge Kavanaugh, older now, quieter, his expression unreadable. When Maya's name echoed through the chamber as Justice Richardson, he didn't clap, but his eyes glistened. The laughter he once gave her now returned as silence, the kind born from awe, not arrogance. As the ceremony ended, reporters asked Maya for her first words as a Supreme Court justice. She paused at the steps, the cameras flashing around her. When they laughed, she said softly, I was building, and now the world stands to applaud. Her words rippled across the nation, a reminder to every dreamer, every underdog, every silenced soul that sometimes the sweetest sound in the world is the silence that follows your triumph. The sun rose over Chicago in hues of gold and quiet glory, spilling light through the same courthouse windows that once watched a young woman's spirit break. But today, the halls felt different, not heavier, not colder, but reverent. As though even the marble remembered, Justice Maya Richardson stepped through the entrance of the Federal Court of Appeals, her black robe trailing like a living echo of triumph. Every step she took reverberated through time, each one layered over the memory of a girl who once stood here, trembling, her voice dismissed beneath laughter. She had returned, not as a defendant, not as an idealist, but as the law itself. The court was assembled for a historic retrial, a case involving wrongful sentencing, eerily similar to the one she'd once fought years ago. The media called it the Richardson Review. Even Judge Robert Kavanaugh, now semi-retired, had been invited to witness the session as an observer. He sat in the second row, silent, his once commanding posture now weighted by reflection. When Maya entered the chamber, the crowd rose. Not for protocol, but for respect. The same benches that had once whispered about her now held their breath in reverence. As she took her seat at the bench, Maya's eyes drifted across the courtroom. The old mahogany railings, the polished floor, the witness stand. Every corner carried ghosts of that day. The day laughter had filled this room instead of justice. She looked to her right, where the young defense attorney now stood nervously clutching her papers, her voice shaking. Maya smiled softly, recognizing herself from years ago. "Take your time, counselor," she said kindly. "We're here to listen." Those words, simple, sincere, carried the weight of a lifetime. The young attorney began her argument. Her tone wavered at first, then strengthened as she saw Maya's reassuring nod. The entire courtroom listened in stillness. When she finished, Maya leaned forward, her voice calm but commanding. "This court recognizes the failures that have lived too long in our system, the kind that punishes before it understands and silences before it listens. Today that ends." Every word felt like an unspoken response to the laughter that once tried to define her. She signed the final ruling with quiet certainty. Case overturned. Defendant released. Justice restored. The courtroom erupted into applause. Not the chaotic kind, but a slow, reverent one. As the crowd began to disperse, Maya remained seated for a moment, staring down at the empty judge's chair opposite hers, the same one Kavanaugh had once filled. She stood, turned toward the gallery, and locked eyes with him. He rose from his seat slowly, uncertainly, and walked toward her. The years had softened him. His once proud face now carried the creases of humility. "Justice Richardson," he said quietly, "I wasn't wrong about your fire. I was just too blind to see where it would lead." Maya regarded him for a long moment, then extended her hand. "You taught me what arrogance looks like, Judge," she said. "And for that, I learned the value of grace." Their handshake lingered, 2 lifetimes meeting in a single gesture. Kavanaugh's eyes glistened as he whispered, "You became everything the system needed, and everything I failed to be." "No," she replied gently. "I just became what I was meant to be, once I stopped needing its approval." Outside, cameras waited as she descended the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions. "Justice Richardson, what does today mean to you? How does it feel to return here after all these years? Do you have a message for those still fighting to be heard?" Maya paused at the final step. The wind caught her robe, fluttering it like a flag, black fabric shimmering under the afternoon sun. She looked directly into the cameras and spoke, her voice calm and resonant. "Once I stood here as a woman they laughed at. Today I stand as proof that laughter doesn't define you. Perseverance does. When they closed their doors, I built my own halls. When they silenced my voice, I learned to echo through generations." She smiled faintly, her tone softening into poetry. "When they laughed, I was building, and now? The world stands to applaud." The crowd erupted, not with noise, but with feeling. People wept. Reporters lowered their cameras just to listen. Later that evening, Maya returned to her home, a quiet brownstone overlooking the Capitol. The city lights blinked gently, reflecting off the glass like a constellation of second chances. She walked to her study. The same framed rejection notice from years ago now hung above her desk. "Case dismissed," red ink still vivid. Beneath it, she had added a brass plaque that read, "Case restored." Maya poured herself a cup of tea and sat down, letting the silence wash over her. The weight of victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like peace. On her desk lay a handwritten letter she had started drafting earlier that week. The recipient line read simply, "To every young woman who's ever been laughed at." She picked up her pen and began to write. "They will tell you your dreams are too loud, your ambition too much. They will laugh when you speak and doubt when you stand. But remember this, laughter fades and legacies echo. Build quietly, rise slowly, and one day they will whisper your name. Not as a joke, but as a standard." She signed it, Justice Maya Richardson. Outside, the night air carried a rare calm, the kind that only follows storms. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of Chicago, a new law student looked up her name, watched her oath ceremony, and whispered to herself, "Maybe I can too." The world had laughed once, but now it listened. And in that silence, in that sacred stillness of justice fulfilled, the legend of Maya Richardson was complete. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs hope today, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of resilience, justice, and triumph.